We'll be focusing on our GBV focus today. Our gender-based focus is something that it has been such an important conversation, and we've had some multiple conversations. And something that keeps coming back into our themes is the issue of harmful gender norms. And today, because it keeps coming into the conversations, we're like, let's unearth this and speak about harmful gender norms that are societally constructed, and there are expectations about individuals and how they should behave based on their gender. These norms often reinforce male dominance and female subordination here on the African continent. And most of the time, it contributes to a culture where gender-based violence is normalized in our societies. When you think about it, there are so many examples, right? When we speak to the men are supposed to be strong, assertive, unemotional, and at times emotionally unavailable, where women are expected to be obedient, modest, and self-sacrificing. So we're going to be looking at this, talking about these societal norms, how they fuel gender-based violence across the continent, why these particular norms persist, and what can be done to challenge and change them through education, policy, and community action. We're joined by Ibukun Omololu, who's a gender-based expert and principal consultant of the Teal Tree Company. Thank you so much for joining us, Ibukun. It's a great pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Benjamin. It's good to meet you, and I'm excited to speak with you.
You know, this concept of gender norms is one that keeps coming since we started our series on our gender-based violence focused. And it's one that maybe we say constantly, but I don't know if we understand the meaning of gender norms because we use it so flippantly. Can you help us unpack what we mean by the phrase gender norms?
Fantastic. So gender norms basically are socially constructed rules, okay, that are passed down through families, communities, media, institutions, from one level of society to another, that basically defines how people behave. It defines your values, it defines your attitude, it defines your behavior, and so much more. And it's sadly because it's basically entrenched in a lot of cultural and traditional norms, right? So it's difficult sometimes to challenge, and for things that are just handed over to you, particularly from the family system and then into the communities, because we're more communal in Africa, it's something that tends to stick until we get exposed to new knowledge, new ideas, or you basically just start questioning things like, why do we do things like this? And what can be different. And so that's basically the starting point. And because it has been entrenched from, like I said, generations to generations, it's more difficult to actually stop, because people have internally imbibed a lot of things. They've been modeled different values, consciously and subconsciously. So it takes a lot of education, a lot of strategizing, a lot of intentionality with the kind of strategies, and particularly contextually relevant strategies, because not all situations are the same.
What informs these gender norms? Could you help us understand them? Because we tend to think they're natural. We tend to believe that they are commonplace amongst everyone in the world, and they look very much the same anywhere you go. But this is not the case.
Fantastic question again. So basically, I would start with what we call socialization. Socialization is basically how people grow, how they learn, how they pick up things, what are modeled to them, and then they are imbibed. And the first place that people get in touch with socialization is either their families or from peers, friends, churches and associations, a mosque, or whatever places they go. And so what you've seen modeled to you, so if you see most survivors of gender-based violence, there is statistics that show that a lot of them have actually either passed through homes where their parents were violent towards one another,
Mm-hmm.
or they're seeing it, being replicated at different times of their life, and then inherently or internally just imbibed it without you knowing. And so how people treat others, how people talk to others, how people, if a child has seen his father treat women or demean them in a way that basically brings them down or does not dignify them, tends to adopt that. And if it is something that is then encouraged in the society, like this is how to be a man, this is how to stand up for yourself and to gain respect, or even if it's a woman who has seen maybe her parents who love each other, but our father has been, perpetrating domestic abuse on her mom. I have come across women who tend to equate domestic abuse as love because that was what they saw their parents go through. And so these are things these are ways that it is internalized and entrenched. It's from basically what you see, it's from traditions that is passed down. This is how to be a man. Oh, you don't cry. You have to be able to strengthen and shoulder everything. And that in itself, encourages to some extent a level of mental suppression, emotional suppression, which then builds up and then becomes an outburst in the future. So basically, there are different ways that is done. And even when you look at the religious houses and some of the misinterpreted text from the mosques, from the Bible and the likes, so a lot of that also affects how people think. And this is why a lot of women, even when they go through domestic violence, do not, they still want to stick with their husbands, right? Rather than, separate for a certain time and, ensure that you are safe and your children are safe, than to fix a marriage with someone who feels you are his punching bag, and that has to keep going on. And so all of that, culminates into what is happening in society today. And it requires a lot of education, reorientation, mindset work, and a whole lot more. But it does work if it's applied strategically and contextually.
Yes, I love that elaborate way that you spoke of it, because it answers some of the questions that I wanted to ask you as follow-up questions. So Ibukun, thank you so much for that elaborate response. I'd like us to look at, how this kind of gender norm issue filters into gender-based violence, because many people don't understand that concept. They think some of these gender norms that you've highlighted, like being unemotionally unavailable as a man, being strong, not showing your weakness as a man, women have to be subservient, they have to be humble, self-sacrificing. Those are actually good, especially for building communities, for building families. How do you counteract those particular stereotypes? Because we don't have a reference most of the time as Africans, because this is all we know. These are the norms that have been taken from one generation to the next generation, and we hold them strong as part of our cultures. So what do we replace these norms as? And that's part of the difficulties that we have as Africans. We'll talk a little bit about that. We're speaking on our gender-based violence focus today, speaking about the phrase that keeps coming up in our different conversations that we've had on our GBV focus, which is gender norms. And we're like, let's understand this. Let's try to figure it out and be more open to what it means. Ibukun Omololu is helping us on this one, gender expert and principal consultant of the Teal Tree Company, a gender consulting firm. Let's take a break. We'll be back.
Get the news, music, and lifestyle of Africa on Channel Africa, the African perspective. Africa in business on Channel Africa.
The United States was very vocal at the beginning of South Africa's G20 presidency, and this is largely due to strained relations with South Africa at the time, that they were not really keen on participating. Where do they stand right now?
The US is planning to take over the presidency of the G20 next year, and our understanding from them is that they intend to continue to do so, and therefore it is quite difficult then to be in a situation where you are not attending deputies' meetings or discussions during our presidency and then to take over the presidency next year. From a finance track perspective, there has been engagement. We've been working on a communique last week and this week here in Zimbabwe. What's important about that is that it's a consensus document. And so all the members in the room have to agree to the language that is used there. And our US colleagues have been part of those discussions and negotiations.
Bringing the African markets into your home. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Get set and be ready to go.
On the move with Falisa Tawo and Benjamin Mushatama.
Hey, Rahim Ahmed, Michael Guek Jr., Elion Piri, I see your likes and you watching us on that live stream. Siame Jawad, thank you as well for joining us there on our live stream as we continue to speak on our gender-based violence focus, which has been an SABC campaign. This is where we are housed as Channel Africa. This is the conversation we're having today. Harmful gender norms that are societally constructed. They bring expectations about how we as individuals behave based on our genders. And how does that filter through to gender-based violence? Ibukun Omololu has been helping us on this one, a gender expert and principal consultant of the Teal Tree Company, a gender consulting firm. Ibukun, this is so interesting because when you look at some of these gender norms, they're usually inherited from a communal and family context. And at times we are so used to them that we don't know how to replace them. I mean, when you think about being a woman in your culture, at times subserviency is just so intrinsically knitted to some of the rituals or some of the ceremonies or even religious beliefs. So attaching another identity is probably difficult at times. And that's what we struggle with as Africans, and saying, okay, if I'm not going to assimilate to not being weak as a man, what do I do?
Fantastic question, Benjamin. Again, I think it's really all about, so let me just say that gender-based violence, right? It happens a lot also because of a display of power, right? Power control, someone trying to exert dominance and influence and all of that. And that also ties into the kind of identity people have and how we're raised, again, like I had said before. And so it's really about looking at, and this is one of the most important ways of doing this, right? Looking at models that African models in the community, models in the country, models in the society of what it is to be a man, and putting that out and letting people know that there are certain norms or ways that we have grown up with that are not necessarily healthy. So, for example, most men are defined by the kind of job they do, by their ability to be able to put food on the table, to be able to provide for their family and all. But at the same time, in recent times, you're seeing more women working who are able to provide some form of support to the partner, who are also bringing in their own stand to say, I can provide for the family. It's not a power tussle. It's not about dominance. It's just about us being human and being able to do the right things. And so being able to start breaking things down, like the fact that your wife is working and you are working, doesn't mean that the power of the house has now been ceded over to your wife. It's more or less like a partnership. And so being able to break down healthy ways of defining what a man is, who a woman is, what marriage is, being economically active or financially buoyant, right, doesn't necessarily mean that a man loses his respect or identity or dignity. And being able to build that down and looking at ourselves first as humans. We are all humans first. And really, most of our lives, it's really about how do we interact with ourselves in a way that we build ourselves up. And so I think starting from that and seeing that there's no gender that is more superior than another gender, which is why I started with the display of power, because people want to exert control, they want to exert power, and they want to intimidate. And I say this because when you see gender-based violence being perpetrated, often people think it's about position. They think it's about people being in power. It's not necessarily that. It could be just people having more privilege than the other, or people having access to controls or to something, maybe resources than the other. It may not necessarily be that this is the most powerful person. So then you see that it's kind of like an innate thing of having to exert control or dominance or desire. And this is basically the starting point of what does this mean really, and how do we break it down? And some of the best ways to do that is to start teaching people about education and awareness, even particularly from our schools, on consent, on harassment, on what gender-based violence is, on what identity is, and all of that, and steering this conversation in a way that is age appropriate, even for our children and even for the adults, and even for the people who are older, because gender-based violence is perpetrated all along the lines from childhood to adolescent. In fact, from if I can say, before a child is even born, because women then do face gender-based violence there. And so it goes across the cycle of the life all through. And it starts with really being intentional about how do we define this? And then also seeing that gender-based violence or gender equity is not about eroding culture, but really about questioning and shifting norms on how does this work for us and how can we make it better.
Well, Ibukun, we have to leave it there. Where can we go to find out more about the work that you do and more about the Teal Tree Company?
Fantastic. You can check me up on LinkedIn, on my personal page, or on the business page, the Teal Tree Company. And you can also look us up on the website, www.tealtree.co. We'll be happy to support you as well as, and we do trainings as well and a lot of awareness. So we'll be happy to, even partner with with SABC to do awareness and trainings as well.
Well, thank you. This is a good start of that partnership. Thank you for joining us and helping us on this one, Ibukun.
Thank you, Benjamin. It was good to speak to you.
That's Ibukun Omololu, who is a gender expert and a principal consultant of the Teal Tree Company, which I mentioned as a gender consulting firm. What is your take on that one? Are there gender norms that you are like, you know what, I had to get rid of this one? It was something that was imposed on me as a mother, as a brother, and I just didn't like what this actually meant in how I wanted to live my life. Let us know, what are the harmful gender norms that you've noticed in your community? Remember that WhatsApp number is +2763